Alright guys, so today we are going to be discussing what exactly makes a person a Sigma male, so make sure you stay tuned. No, but seriously, what's up y'all? Zappy MMA here, back for another banger, and you guys really seem to enjoy the craziest butterfly effects in UFC history video. A lot of you guys left your own suggestions of butterfly effects that I missed in the comments, and since there's still so much more to talk about, I thought I'd make a part 2. If you guys didn't watch the first part, I highly recommend you checking it out after watching this one, but in that video, I went over 5 examples of the butterfly effect in the UFC, and for those of you who don't know, the butterfly effect is basically how the littlest of things, such as a butterfly flapping its wings, can cause a huge outcome or multiple outcomes, such as a hurricane. In the first video, I mentioned how Archduke Franz Ferdinand, making a wrong turn on the street, allowed his assassin to assassinate him, which basically ended up causing World War I, but there are many other real-world examples of the butterfly effect. So for today's video, we are going to be going over 5 more of the craziest butterfly effects in the UFC history, and just getting right into it with a more well-known case is of course the infamous Aljamain Sterling versus Petr Yan illegal knee. So back in March of 2021, amidst the pandemic, Petr Yan was set to defend his title for the first time against Aljamain Sterling for the co-main event at UFC 259, and this was a hype matchup. Aljo was coming off a first-round rear-naked choke against Corey Sandhagen. Petr Yan had just won the vacant title in dominant fashion, scoring a TKO against Jose Aldo. Not to mention, there was a bit of bad blood between the two of them. Now, Petr Yan looked really good against Aljo. He dropped him. He was taking him down. It was really looking like Petr was going to have a very successful first title defense until the end of round 4 when Aljo failed a takedown, Petr sprawled, and then illegally kneed Aljo while he was still down. Whether you believe if Aljo was putting on an Oscar-worthy performance is one thing, but you can't deny that it was a blatant illegal knee, and at the very least, Aljo was probably badly robbed, and why Petr Yan even threw this knee in the first place is still kind of a mystery to me. I actually think his corner told him to do so. Anyways, despite there only being about 30 seconds left of the round, Aljo still wasn't able to continue, and Mark Smith, the referee at the time, could be heard saying that it was intentional, meaning that it would be ruled a DQ, making Aljamain the champion, despite losing most of the fight up until that point. And as most of you probably know, this is exactly what ended up happening. Petr Yan was disqualified, and Aljamain was declared the champion in an extremely controversial decision. And, of course, the trajectory of both of their careers drastically changed after that. Aljo then went on to not only win the rematch, but he then beat TJ Dillashaw and Henry Cejudo, defending his title 3 times in the process. And even though Petr Yan is the current champion, he had to go on a skid before doing so. It's just very hard to imagine what would have happened if Petr Yan never threw that knee. You see, if Petr Yan did end up going to decision, he would have undoubtedly won that fight, and he probably wouldn't have rematched Aljo right away, or maybe even at all. And more than likely, Aljo would have never became champion, meaning Sean O'Malley probably would have never became champion. Petr Yan probably wouldn't have lost to Sean O'Malley in the first place, meaning he wouldn't have had to fight Merab coming off of 2 losses, meaning Merab probably wouldn't have become champion either. The timeline would have just been so different if it wasn't for that one knee. I mean, it's not a stretch to say that Petr Yan would have still been champ from 2021 all the way to present day. He would have been super confident. He wouldn't have went on that 3-fight skid, and who knows how the division would have looked like today. But moving on. Now, this next topic again involves Petr Yan, and what I'm referring to is the canceled fight between a 21-year-old Ilia Topuria making his UFC debut on short notice against Petr Yan. So back in 2018, for UFC Moscow, Ilia Topuria was offered a short notice fight against Petr Yan at bantamweight. This would have been his UFC debut. Ilia was also only 6-0 at the time, and this would have been Petr Yan's second fight in the UFC. Now, for unknown reasons, this fight never ended up actually happening. Petr Yan did end up fighting Jinsu San in an absolutely generational performance, and Ilia didn't even make his UFC debut until 2 years later in 2020, which was also on short notice against Yusuf Zalal. So this one is kind of hard to imagine just exactly how the UFC timeline would have changed if the fight did end up happening. I do gotta say though, I don't think a short notice 21-year-old Ilia Topuria would have beaten Petr Yan for his debut, especially at bantamweight. And like I just mentioned, this was 2 years before Ilia's UFC debut. A young fighter can grow a lot in 2 years, both physically and mentally. I just think that it would have been too soon for Ilia. And if he did lose to Petr, like I think he would have, he more than likely would have still been signed to the UFC, meaning he would have had to learn on the job. Ilia is obviously undefeated right now, but a loss like that, especially for a young fighter, can really make or break them. It's very possible that it could have destroyed his confidence, and he would have had to fight again in the UFC straight into the deep end. Without those 2 extra years to build himself as a fighter, it's not unlikely that Ilia would have lost again in the UFC, especially if he would have stayed at bantamweight. And who knows what those two losses would have done to him. You see, part of Ilia's confidence that made him who he is today is that he's undefeated. It's very possible that Ilia would have never became champion, let alone double champion, if that matchup did end up happening in the first place. And the UFC as we know it today could have been very different without Ilia's generational run. So the final three topics on this list all involve the flyweight division in some way, and we all know Pantoja was on a four-fight title defense streak until his recent injury against Joshua Van back at UFC 323. However, what a lot of people forget is just two title defenses earlier, Pantoja had a razor close fight against Steven Erceg back at UFC 301, and a lot of people even thought it could have gone to Erceg. Now, heading into that fifth round, two of the judges actually had the fight 28-28, meaning that the fifth round was the deciding factor of the winner of that fight, which obviously ended up being Pantoja. Erceg did actually have the slight momentum going into that round, and despite being controlled a little bit in the beginning, he had Pantoja busted up in the fifth. He was landing good shots. He was up on damage. It was looking like Erceg was really going to win until he shot for a takedown with about 90 seconds left of the fight, got reversed, and ended up on bottom position for the remainder of the round. Now, this failed takedown attempt did not only cost him the round, but in all honesty, it costed him the entire fight and his chance at becoming champion. I mean, why he even decided to shoot in the first place, who knows? But if he didn't go for that takedown and did end up beating Pantoja, things would have been so different right now in the flyweight division. For instance, Erceg went on to lose two more fights in a row after that, and barely scraped by an Ode Osborne, arguably losing in most people's eyes. It's just like I mentioned earlier. You never know how a first UFC loss will affect a fighter's confidence. And if Erceg did end up becoming champion, I mean, title matchups probably would have played out a lot differently. I doubt Pantoja at the time would have got an immediate rematch. Erceg probably would have ended up fighting Brandon Royval or something. And who knows, Royval could have ended up becoming champion. As for Pantoja, you just don't know if he would have rebounded from a loss like that. Maybe instead he would have been the one to lose three fights in a row. You never know. Maybe Moreno would have become champion again, considering he did beat Erceg too. It's just hard to say for sure how the division would have played out if Erceg never ended up shooting that takedown. Moving on to this next topic, the flyweight division as we know it today is one of the more exciting divisions right now in the UFC, with Joshua Van as champion, Tyra fighting for the title soon. You got Horiguchi in the mix, you got Manel Cap, and now even Lone Cavinar. So it might be a surprise to some newer fans that Dana White came dangerously close on a few different occasions to permanently shutting down the flyweight division for good. You see, back between 2017 and 2018, Demetrius Johnson, as I'm sure most of you know, was the flyweight champion at the time. And even though Demetrius Johnson is highly respected amongst the MMA community today, things weren't always that way. DJ was doing very poorly on pay-per-view numbers. And because of these low pay-per-view sales, Dana White around this time cut a lot of the flyweight roster. He told DJ that he would very soon be shutting down the division. Things weren't looking good for flyweights, to say the very least. However, with the sudden rise of new exciting contenders, such as Davison Figueiredo and Henry Cejudo eventually beating DJ and becoming champion, it added more of an exciting shift to the division, which ultimately ended up saving it. Now, it's hard to say for sure just how different the UFC would look like today if Dana did end up shutting down the division. I mean, flyweights give us our first Mexican champion in Brandon Moreno, which without a doubt brought a huge fan base to the sport. Some of the best fights over the years were delivered by the flyweights, and like I said earlier, it's one of the most exciting fights in the division right now. And to think if we never got the sudden rise of contenders at flyweight, this could have very much been reality, which sort of leads us on to the fifth and final topic of today's video, and that of course is the Demetrius Johnson-Ben Askren trade. So like I mentioned earlier, DJ wasn't doing so great with pay-per-view sales. He didn't want to fight TJ Dillashaw because of his low pay. He was getting into problems with the UFC and Dana White, which ultimately led to the UFC trading him to one championship for Ben Askren. Again, it's just hard to imagine how the UFC would have been like today if DJ stuck around and Askren never came along. I mean, it's very possible DJ would have beat Henry in the trilogy, regaining his throne. We may have never seen the rise of Figgy in the first place, meaning we probably wouldn't have seen the rise of Brandon Moreno becoming the first ever Mexican champion. On the other hand, though, we could have still seen those rises. Maybe DJ would have got chinned by Figgy. Maybe he would have lost the decision to Pantoja. You just can't say for sure how the division would have played out. And if Ben Askren never came along to the UFC, I mean, if we're being honest, he basically kickstarted Jorge Masvidal's career with his flying knee KO. We possibly would have never seen Masvidal's sudden rise and probably wouldn't have gotten the introduction of the BMF belt. Masvidal probably wouldn't have got all those undeserved title shots meaning maybe Usman would have fought Leon much earlier. If Leon fought Usman sooner for the title and put an end to his reign much earlier, who knows how the welterweight division would look like today. Maybe if they fought earlier, Usman would have won and reigned as champion much longer. We just can't say for certain. And that's going to do it for today, guys. Leave me some more topics down below that I missed. Maybe I'll make more parts to this video. And as always, if you made it this far, you might as well like and subscribe. And until next time.